French officials have touted the 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris as an international triumph, a chance to showcase the country, bring new economic opportunities to its communities, and even clean up the iconic River Seine. But thousands of people, including migrants, have been displaced to make way for the Olympics, and concerns are growing over surveillance techniques being deployed to keep the Games safe. People in power went to Paris to ask whether the upcoming Olympics are worth the cost.
French President Emmanuel Macron is an enthusiastic champion of this summer's Olympic Games in Paris.
Nos Jeux olympiques et paralympiques en France, on les a voulus, on a été les chercher. Ce sera un formidable moment de fierté française et de célébration. Vive le sport français, vive la République et vive la France.
The president's positive outlook is shared by the International Olympic Committee's executive director, Christophe Duby.
This is what Paris has as a vision. 500,000 people will be able to take part in that unique moment. People will say, I was there or I was watching. You know what? I can't wait.
Like other Olympics, the 2024 Summer Games are seen as an opportunity to showcase the host city and promote tourism. But the Paris Games are hoping to provide a new blueprint with an Olympics built on the idea that bigger is not necessarily better.
We really favor working with existing venues to host World Championships, World Cups that are organized every year. When you can go to the same locations, you win.
These games are also billed as greener, more inclusive, accessible, and affordable than previous Olympics.
Paris 2024 will be more gender balanced, more sustainable. We have really completely changed our approach.
Marie Sallois is the International Olympic Committee's Corporate and Sustainable Development Director.
Paris 2024 ambition is to cut by half the carbon emission of the Olympic Games compared to the average of London 2012 and Rio 2016. This is a very ambitious goal.
The motto of the Paris Olympics is Games Wide Open. Etienne Taubois is the CEO of Paris 2024, the city's organizing committee.
Games Wide Open means being open to the various issues of our society. So it's how we do deliver those games, being socially responsible, being financially responsible, putting sustainability at the heart of everything we do.
But since the Summer Games were awarded to Paris, there's been an expanding movement in France opposing the decision to host.
Du coup, là après on va monter au Sacré-Cœur, parce que le Sacré-Cœur c'est le lieu où ils vont amener la flamme olympique et que c'est évidemment un des joyaux du tourisme français. Ok? C'est parti? Allez.
Paul Alozi is an organizer for the anti-Olympic group Revers de la Médaille. Alozi also works for Médecins du Monde, a non-profit that delivers medical and social services.
On est parti? Allez, c'est showtime!
The banners say words like homeless, slums, squats, encampments.
C'est parti! Vous pouvez verser!
And are doused with paint in the Olympic colors to call attention to the ways the upcoming games are impacting people living on the street. A growing number of people around the globe see the Olympics as a destructive force, displacing people from their homes and militarizing their communities. In fact, the Olympics have become an increasingly tough sell. People and Power set out to investigate whether France can deliver on the promises made and what the outcome could mean for future games.
You have two different versions of what it means to be a modern Olympics. One coming from the International Olympic Committee from on high, and then one coming from the grassroots from on low. And they're clashing somewhere in the middle.
Let's bring in Jules Boykoff.
Jules Boykoff is a leading expert on the Olympics and a former professional soccer player.
I have a much more critical view today than I did when I was 19-year-old running up and down the pitch for the U.S. team.
He's written 6 books about activism and political movements related to the Games.
Between 2013 and 2018, around a dozen cities just said no to the Olympics when they were given the chance. And in part, that's because of all the problems that we've been seeing when it comes to the Olympics.
Boykoff is in Paris ahead of the Games. He's researching the anti-Olympic protest movement here.
If you look at the Paris 2024 Summer Olympics, you'll see all the problems that are endemic in the Olympic Games. You've seen the price tag elevate significantly, AI-driven surveillance in Olympic venues. You see the gentrification of particular spaces with various communities being priced out, moved out.
I feel like I remember we kind of went to the left a little bit. There was like buildings being built up there that I thought was also Olympic Village.
Everything is Olympic Village.
All this stuff, all this, even
From
over
here.
there. Over there too?
Everything.
Wow.
Natsuko Sasaki is part of the No Olympics movement. Sasaki lives in Paris. She's been organizing against these games by taking visitors on what she calls the toxic tour. This area, near the athletes' village, is home to a large immigrant population.
People living in this house are absolutely unhappy.
Residents here say the Olympics have brought years of pollution and noise. A new freeway was built cutting through the neighborhood, and some low-income housing was torn down.
This is just so much further along in terms of the construction. I was here in May 2022, and this area looked totally different. Yeah, lots changed.
This area will soon be the temporary home of more than 14,000 Olympic athletes, 8,000 Paralympians, and their coaches and staff.
You can see every detail here, actually. Forums, balcony, terrace, and winter gardens. And after the games, it will be sold to clearly middle-class family.
Sasaki worries about the transformation of the neighborhood. Oftentimes, the area around a former Olympic village becomes unrecognizable and unaffordable to its previous residents.
The objective is to build a new neighborhood which is mixed, which will have offices, they will have businesses, and also housing, schools, public buildings, more than 2,800 homes after the Games. So that's a legacy in an area where it's much needed. All these housing will be mostly actually for social housing or people coming with average incomes.
The question here is how many social housing? They can be very flexible on that question.
And for those who are already struggling, advocates say the Games are the reason why newcomers to Paris are being forced out.
Les Jeux Olympiques, c'est un cauchemar pour les réfugiés. On est des victimes des Jeux Olympiques. Ils veulent nettoyer Paris parce qu'il y a les Jeux Olympiques, parce que les réfugiés, c'est une mauvaise image pour les bobos qui viennent regarder le jeu.
Faris Akali Youssef works for the organization United Migrants. He was at this former cement factory just a block from the athletes' village in April 2023, when hundreds of migrants squatting there were evicted.
L'expulsion, ça a été passé, c'est-à-dire à 6 heures du matin. On était entouré par la police. Au début, on a cru qu'il y a des solutions d'hébergement, mais toutes les personnes qui vivaient dans cette escouade, aujourd'hui, on est en train de les repérer partout dans Paris.
Squatting in old abandoned buildings is one of the few ways unhoused people are able to find shelter in Paris. But in June 2023, the French government adopted a bill toughening the penalties for squatting, making it more difficult and risky.
Ça va être expulsé avec cette nouvelle loi qu'ils ont fait pour les Jeux Olympiques.
Youssef landed in France as a refugee from Chad in 2015. More than 1 million asylum seekers and migrants arrived in Europe that year, mostly from Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq.
Je me suis retrouvé à la rue. Avec le froid et la pluie, c'était dur.
Because of his own experience, Youssef now works to help distribute basic food and supplies to migrants struggling to survive on the streets and in Paris's few remaining squats.
On a des bébés et des familles qui vivent ici et qui n'ont pas de revenus, qui n'ont pas de travail. Et c'est pas facile pour nous parce qu'il y a plus des squats dans Paris, il y a plus de foyers dans Paris. Où on va les mettre?
People leave their country because there's a war, because there's extreme poverty, because they have to flee like a natural catastrophe. It's not any homeless population, it's refugee people, so they're already under the stress of the violence of the departure, the violence of the journey. And then you arrive and you're welcomed by the sidewalk and you have to live under a tent and there's nobody to really help you. It's the toughest life conditions I've ever saw.
This underpass has become a makeshift home for around 100 unhoused people, mostly men, mostly from Afghanistan. For those living here, it's one of the few options to stay in the city, where many have already found work.
I think they're going to close the area. En fait, maintenant, avec les Jeux Olympiques, ils veulent envoyer tout le monde loin, loin, loin de Paris. Vous voulez rester en Île-de-France? Oui. Ouais, bien sûr, pour le travail. Si je vais partir, c'est très compliqué. C'est très compliqué, c'est ça.
Dozens of riot police and local police converged above the overpass to clear out the encampment.
Ah, ça y est, la police qui arrive. OK.
People scramble to leave with whatever belongings they could carry. While the mattresses and tents are bulldozed and carted off to the dump, the evicted board buses, some headed to so-called SAS reception centers. The centers, created by the government in 2023, are located around the country. People who arrive there are provided food and shelter for a few weeks.
Aujourd'hui, il me parle des SAS. Je ne crois pas tant que je n'ai pas vu de changement par moi-même. On n'a jamais vu une solution globale pour ces personnes. Jamais.
The stated goals of the centers are to take pressure off the asylum application system in Paris and speed up the processing time for people seeking refugee status so they can legally live and work in France. Hassan Zad Kudratullah is from Afghanistan. He was living on the street in Paris.
In Paris, too much problem. Nobody help us. We sleep in the street.
Kudratullah voluntarily boarded a bus to a SAS center in Bordeaux, where he has temporary housing. After that, he doesn't know what will happen to him.
We have 5 persons in the room. They give us 40 euros per week. They tell us we send this camp is maybe 5 weeks. After 5 weeks, they want to transfer us.
This has really nothing to do with the games, right? And I don't say that the situation is an easy one. What the French authorities were explaining is that moving these people from Paris is to help with the pressure that is put on Paris as the capital. So we have to make the distinction between the pressure that is put on any given capital, the response from the authorities, and the games.
We are completely disconnected to what is happening. We are, planning for the games. These displacement, replacement, finding a solution is an ongoing business, and it goes on whether there is or there is not the games.
Critics argue that removing unhoused people and sending them to SAS centers is an ineffective short-term solution to a long-term problem, and that the unstated goal of this is to clear the streets of Paris ahead of the Games.
It's been years that the police has been mistreating people in the streets of Paris. But now the evictions, the police harassment, it's getting bigger and bigger because of the Olympics.
And while the French government works to move people out of Paris, there are plans to bring more police and even the military in. That's more than 40,000 officers, 15,000 soldiers, and thousands more private security. The goal being to protect athletes and fans.
17 people were slaughtered yesterday, 2 in the Olympic Village and the other 15 in the shootout at the airport.
Past Olympics and major sporting events have come under attack.
A terrorist attack at the Summer Games in Atlanta.
and France has been the target of several domestic attacks.
Charlie Hebdo, a satirical magazine, has been attacked. At least 12 people were dead.
The opening ceremony for Paris 2024 is along the river Seine, posing an even greater security challenge for organizers than in past games. The athletes' parade will be held on boats, passing by some of Paris's most iconic landmarks.
For the opening ceremony, first time ever, an open ceremony outside the stadium, there was a big ambition of having as many people as possible around the Seine River.
In front of you, the world is passing through on boats and barges. Behind you, you have the Eiffel Tower. It's the most outstanding opening ceremony where we welcome the world.
Can France pull this off? Can it do this big splash of an opening ceremony along the Seine? On one hand, potentially more people could enjoy the spectacle directly. On the other hand, it means that a heavy military presence will be necessary.
For Olympic organizers, there's a tension between hosting large crowds of sports fans and keeping those fans safe.
The fact that people are saying it's a legitimate terrorist target is real, and we can't deny that. There's no question about it. What you need to look at is whether the response is proportionate and whether the response lasts beyond the Olympic moment. And what we often see is that it's both disproportionate and everlasting.
And with concerns about security high following the Crocus City Hall attack in Moscow, organizers are gearing up to deal with potential threats. The initial plans for a nearly 6-kilometer-long route with as many as 600,000 spectators have already been scaled back to around 300,000 for security reasons. To manage the expected crowds, they're also installing state-of-the-art surveillance technology.
Ce système de reconnaissance algorithmique est censé, en prenant toutes les données, détecter des comportements qui seraient anormaux. Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Danielle Simonet is a member of France's national parliament from a left-wing party. Simonet has been advocating against the use of new algorithmically driven surveillance. During the games, cameras will be used to detect things like weapons and abandoned objects, and crowds of people gathering.
L'utilisation de la surveillance, des drones et des méthodes algorithmiques pour déceler des comportements qui seraient problématiques, inappropriés, anormaux. On nous a présenté toutes ces expérimentations comme une innovation extrêmement importante pour la sécurité de toutes et tous pendant les Jeux Olympiques. Donc, a priori, comme ça semble assez fascinant. Mais en fait, je vais être un peu grossière, mais c'est du foutage de gueule. Parce qu'en fait, il n'y a absolument aucune démonstration scientifique qui permet d'attester que techniquement, ce système fonctionne.
Critics argue that the French public are being used as guinea pigs to test the new technology. And there's also a history of how surveillance methods have been used by police.
On est déjà confronté à un problème de racisme systémique dans la police.
Opponents worry that after the games, the technology will be used against those who are already disproportionately targeted by police in France: racial minorities, people living on the streets, and political activists. The surveillance and policing plans have also been the target of protests. This group of activists, which included members of a privacy rights group, gathered outside of an Olympic souvenir store, dressed like athletes.
Technology will never prevent someone from killing other people on the streets.
Bastien Le Carrec is a lawyer with La Quadrature du Net, a digital rights advocacy organization.
The Olympics are always an occasion to introduce in the law new aspects that were previously refused. The video surveillance using AI was used in France illegally for years, but now the government has had the occasion to legalize them using the excuse of the Olympics.
From the perspective of those who are securitizing, they're perfectly happy. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to ramp up securitization capabilities. When I lived in London, for example, for the 2012 Summer Olympics, they actually ratcheted missiles onto the top of apartment buildings in order to ward off terrorism should there be a terrorist attack. All the special weapons that are purchased, they don't put them back in the box and return them to sender after the Olympic Games.
The cost for security is roughly 320 million euros. The initial Paris budget was estimated at nearly 7 billion euros. Organizers say it's now costing closer to 8.4 billion euros.
Budget-wise, we were able to keep the financial trajectory almost to what it was planned. So we are very satisfied with this, and we believe that's a new blueprint for the future Olympic Games.
Historically, keeping the finances on track has been an Olympic-sized problem.
Every single Olympics since 1960 for which there is reliable data has gone over budget.
One of the biggest expenditures for Paris is the 1.4 billion euro cleanup of the River Seine, making the water swimmable for the first time in 100 years. Paris's sewer system was built in the 19th century and regularly dumps pollution into the Seine when it's overwhelmed by heavy rains and storms. In 2022, 1.9 million cubic meters of untreated wastewater poured into the river.
This is an investment that was long overdue. It's a massive achievement if we can do it, but we're confident we'll get there.
Francois Croquette is the Director of Ecological Transition and Climate for the City of Paris. He's a strong advocate for the cleanup of the Seine.
The Olympics has been a huge boost, and this has given us the energy and the funds to produce a massive effort in terms of investment and in terms of the work that has been put into cleaning the river.
The city has constructed a massive storage tank that holds up to nearly 50 million liters of overflow water. It's connected to a new tunnel that will divert the wastewater downstream to a sewage treatment plant.
Because this is the River Seine, because this is an iconic place for tourists from all over the world, especially during the Olympics, we would like to send the message that if we've done it in Paris, you can do it elsewhere.
The problem, according to some environmental experts, is that the new system could soon be overwhelmed by increased rainfall due to climate change, spewing sewage back into the river.
They talk a big environmental game, but oftentimes the follow-through is lacking. When I lived in Rio de Janeiro in 2015 and 2016, the Olympics were supposed to clean up Guanabara Bay, this bay that was notorious for having large animals like horses and goats floating in it. So when Rio was bidding, they promised that 80% of the water that was filtrated was going to be clean. By the time the Olympics rolled around, it was actually only about 25-26%.
Donc il y a beaucoup de greenwashing. C'est-à-dire qu'on fait croire que ça va être les Jeux Olympiques les moins polluants. On nous promet des Jeux écologiques. Mais c'est une belle hypocrisie, parce que les Jeux Olympiques les plus écologiques, à la limite, sont ceux qui n'auront pas lieu.
As Paris gears up to welcome millions of fans and athletes, the question again remains whether these games will deliver on the promises of its promoters.
I think it's a trend that the IOC is trying to put forward so that actually the games adapt to the cities they go to and not the other way around. We've made a choice of not constructing a lot for these games, and we hope that we will leave a fantastic legacy.
A successful Paris Games could raise the bar for future Olympics. For France, this summer is a preview of what's ahead. The country is expected to host the 2030 Winter Games in the French Alps.
The Games will leave an imprint, souvenirs for all of us, starting with the fields of play, but for the communities, it will be very long-lasting afterwards.
If the past is prologue, they're going to have a very difficult time in Paris meeting their big promises. That's just the Olympic track record, plain and true. We're living in an extraordinary moment when it comes to the Olympics in terms of their worldwide reach, but also in terms of their internal contradictions. And you know, you can live in this world and not have a heart. But to look at all the things that have transpired in the context of the Olympic Games and not believe that things absolutely need to change, well, then it really makes you wonder.
And then you have the values of the Olympics. Friendship between the people, peace and everything. And they are insisting on the most inclusive, the greenest, the most humanitarian Olympics ever. Okay, all right, so let's take this bet. You know, like, let's do it for real.